Hey, how's it going? We're so back, and today we're going to talk about the political compass. The political compass is super interesting to me. Um, there have been videos also on YouTube about how it's not really that good, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it's a little bit simplified, even though its purpose is to make more complex the political spectrum, apart from just left and right. It still doesn't really do it justice. I think there's just more, like, for example, there's an international axis of like international policy, right? Um, there's attitudes towards like tradition, right, that are sort of captured in the political compass, but not like fully. Um, Sorry if you guys hear background noise. Um, but yeah, I'm sorry. Uh, yeah, it's super interesting. And a reason I want to talk about it today is because I'm really interested in values, right? We talked earlier on this channel about like what is art, right? We've kind of skirted around values a little bit in other videos as well, and elections. We'll probably do some election videos, um, which are super interesting to me because elections just are a way to concretely measure the values of a nation, right? Um, I think that's super interesting. Um, and to just see how people's values change over time, right? And who they vote for and what they vote for. Um, and so, yeah, I was thinking about the political compass test, and some of the questions are just extremely interesting in that they're like either really good questions to ask or, oops, really like weird questions that don't seem to quite fit, or the really badly worded questions that I shouldn't say really badly worded. They just could be worded a little bit better, I think is fair to say. Um, so yeah, we're gonna talk about those things a little bit today, um, and we're just gonna go through. I literally just went through the quiz. I highlighted a few questions that I found interesting, and we're just gonna go through them. Oh, also something else interesting is I literally clicked slightly agree on every single question, and it gave me center slightly like a quarter of the way up authoritarian, and then like just a tiny bit right. So I thought that was interesting because, for example, some of the questions are kind of worded in a left leaning bent. For example, there's one question that says, "It is a sad reflection on society that something as basic as bottled water is now a branded uh, consumer product," right? Um, I think that's obviously like has a liberal bent to it. It's framing the question in a liberal way to get you to agree with them, right? Whereas other questions frame things in a right wing way. Um, yeah, like like for example, there's one question that I also found interesting that was like those with the ability to pay should get higher access or get higher standard of medical care, right? That's not. I actually wouldn't say that's like super right leaning, but we'll maybe we'll come back to that. Actually, we'll come back to that. Um, yeah, we'll but yeah, obviously some. I kind of thought the question is like kind of skewed towards being towards having you get a liberal result, and actually the test makers I think have said as much, right? Not they haven't said as much, but like people have like figured out as much as that it's basically promoting liberal ideology, right? Which we won't get into that and like whether it's like a blight on society or whatever, or if it's a good thing. But yeah, that's like another like I guess issue with the test. It's not like fully unbiased. Um, a lot of the questions are worded in biased ways, which is actually fine. I think if like it because like I just answered agree to every question, so I was like I'm just a very susceptible person in that experiment, and I still ended up like kind of being right leaning. So that was interesting, I guess. Um, so yeah, first question I thought was interesting. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than transnational corporations. This is a super interesting question because first of all, it's the very first question on the test, and it's probably has the most one of the most jargon heavy questions, right? So like if you're like for example a fifth grader taking this test because your dad told you like, hey, figure out what your politics are right now, like, you don't know what this means, right? So I think this is like a good. I think first of all, this is a good weeder question. Second of all, it's asking you to pick between humanity and the corporations, which is interesting to me because I don't even think that this would have been a good question, quote unquote, like 20 years ago when neoliberalism and neoconservatism was like super big and super popular, right? And everyone was into the corpos and like growing the economy forever. Um, it would have been a kind of a weird question even then, but now that like even the right is kind of anti-corporate and anti-elitist, um, I think it's a super weird question to have, and I think most people will just have to say no. I prefer humanity, right? Um, Rather than the corpos, right? I mean, it's just kind of a because like if you for example answer disagree, I prefer the transnational corporations over humanity. You're probably disagreeing because you think that what's good for the corporations is good for humanity, right? And so I don't know, like I'm sorry. I kind of lost the plot there, but like it just confuses me because like even if you're disagreeing, you're kind of agreeing, you know. But I think you know what you're doing if you're disagreeing. You're saying I prefer corporate profits over humans. Um, yeah, like for example, I think Ben Shapiro answered disagreed to that question. Um, and he was like, "What's good for the corporations is good for humanity," right? He's a perfect example of a neocon. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to me. Um, like what people answer to that and like how they justify their reasoning. Let's see. Here's a question. Same first page I guess of questions. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is a super interesting question to me. How does this apply to authoritarianism or libertarianism? The soft I think the implication is that and a disclosure for this one, I was genuinely so confused. I had to ask ChatGPT for it. I did come up with an answer myself first for what I predicted the answer was, but here's what ChatGPT said. ChatGPT said that the enemy of my enemy is my friend references like authoritarianism, right? For example, Hitler and Stalin chose to join together because they wanted power, right, and because they were able to sacrifice some, I guess, morality for maintaining power, which I find really interesting because I think in the U.S. it's often the opposite, right? Where like the, for example, the authoritarian right tends to be more about morality. For example, the authoritarian right tends to be very like Christian nationalist, very like pro-life, right? And so they're certainly more concerned about morality than freedom. And so to say that they would sacrifice morality for like an alliance, right? Or like some I shouldn't say sacrifice morality, but like the enemy of my enemy is my friend is sort of a sacrifice of morality, even if it's like a little bit of a soft one, right? Sometimes it's just a necessary thing, like right, like the U.S. also did it when they allied with the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany, right? And started Britain and started France and all the allies, right? Um, so I think it's complicated, but what I personally here's how I personally feel about it. I personally think the question should push you answering no should push you towards um, centrism. I think if you answer the enemy, my friend, enemy is not my friend, you should always be pushed towards centrism because you are more concerned about, I guess, decorum and just not making moral compromises. I guess than if you're an extremist and you're just willing to do like what it takes to get your ideology in because you are by definition extremist, a minority, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's complicated, but that's kind of my take on it. What it actually pushes you on the political compass test, I don't know. But if ChatGPT is right, it just pushes you towards authoritarianism if you answer yes or agree. So who knows? But that's another interesting one I thought. Because controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. That one's an interesting one too. Um, I have a feeling this is kind of like what was going through my head. I have a feeling that controlling unemployment pushes you to the left, and controlling inflation pushes you to the right. But I don't think in real life it's quite that simple, right? On the political compass test, I assume that's what like it spits out if you push that in. But like in real life, I don't know if like I think conservatives also hate inflation. I shouldn't say inflation. Conservatives also hate unemployment, right? Because everyone wants food on the table, wants like everyone to go to work, and liberals also hate inflation, right? Like, yes, they will spend more money, but like they don't want prices to all rise because of it necessarily. Even if some conservatives will say they don't care. I think it's we all agree inflation's bad, right? And a lot of liberals were unhappy with Biden with it, for example, right? So I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know if it belongs in the test necessarily, or maybe it does, and I'm just stupid. I don't understand economic policy and like how it relates to politics. But like I feel like we all agree inflation and unemployment are both bad, and maybe a little bit more to authoritarianism. But even then, authoritarianism basically like the Federal Reserve is going to control inflation versus unemployment, right? Those things are very like soft inverses of each other, right? Um, I shouldn't say soft inverses. Technically, they're hard inverses, but the economy's weird, so whatever. Um, let's see. I said we would come back to this one. Those with the ability to pay uh, should get better medical care. This one I think is an interesting one because it's one of several questions that test your ability to recognize hypotheticals, right? So there's a lot of people who will say like anyone who has more money will always get better medical care, like no matter what, even in poor countries or even in socialist countries, right? That is, they're saying it's a prescriptive statement, not a descriptive statement, and it's like, well, what if it wasn't? Um, and I don't even think this is like a hypothetical because there are countries right now where the amount of money you have does not affect the quality of medical care you get. Um, so this isn't really even a hypothetical, but like if it was, I think you have to be able to understand those and like recognize it and say this is a prescriptive statement, not a descriptive statement. Now there are countries that I'm sorry, not there are not countries. There are questions on this test that I don't understand the hypothetical of that I kind of view as a prescriptive, not descriptive statement. But maybe that's just like, and maybe that's my fault, right? Maybe I'm being a hypocrite, but maybe that is, maybe it's the question, maybe it's the test's fault, and we'll get into those pretty soon here. Um, for example, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Does this question really? It does push towards traditionalism, I think, because the traditional view of justice is that justice is punitive, right? I think that's what this question is asking. Should justice be punitive, right? Or should it be, I guess, rehabilitative, right? Um, but it's not. It's not telling you that. The question's being very, very intentionally vague. I think, um, which is both good and bad. I think it's good because not every question should be explained to you like you're a 5-year old. Like, what is your ideology? Tell me exactly what it is. But eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is also a little bit too vague to be useful for this quiz, I think. Um, because that could mean because not everyone can interpret that question correctly and say, should justice be rehabilitative or should it be punitive? Some people are just going to be like, I don't know what that means. I'm just going to say yes, because that sounds right. Um, and it's like, okay, well, that they failed. I don't know. Maybe they didn't fail. Maybe the question failed. But that seems a little vague to me. Um, this is sort of how about this one? All authority should be questioned. This one, I don't want to like rush through this, but like I also don't want to like take too long. All authority should be questioned is interesting because it's also like a very intentionally vaguely worded question, right? Because what does questioned mean? Does it mean all authority should be like held accountable? Does it mean all authority should have the ability to be questioned? Like, I guess like at a press conference or whatever. Um, and I don't know. I guess you could argue that the very most like simple definition is like yes, they should have the ability to be questioned by civilians or like by the people, right? Or at least by someone that's not them, by someone that's not authority. And yeah, I mean, of course, like most people would agree to that, but like it's worded so vaguely you couldn't interpret it as we need to be very very cautious about authority, right? When you say all authority should be questioned, that can be interpreted as like a very libertarian statement, depending on how you say it, right? Um, so I think that's interesting. Um, Maybe I'm thinking too deeply on that one, but yeah. And then the next one, let's see. Ooh, when you are troubled, it is best not to think about it, but instead keep yourself occupied with like happier and more trivial thoughts. I don't remember the exact wording of the question, but that's a good one. Very very much a window into the authoritarian mind, right? Or the extreme authoritarian mind, right? Where introspection, right, is the enemy, and you should just if you have thoughts that are asking you to think deeply about your life, you should just stamp them out, right? And I think even the introspection, and I'm gonna push back on this one, right? I'll try to be unbiased for most of these, or not like give my 2 cents, but I mean I know I haven't been, right? But we'll just pretend that I'm being unbiased right now. Um, I think even though introspection is hard, introspection is a difficult thing to do. I do think it is in people's best interest to do it and to think about those uncomfortable thoughts so that they can just resolve them and have a better life, right? Because in society we have so many ways to distract us from our thoughts right now. You can just plug in music, you can watch a show, you can play video games, you can do literally anything to distract you from your thoughts. Like there's just so many screens around us, so many distractions, and we don't need. I think sometimes we need to not have those distractions. We need to think about our thoughts. We need to think about like the things that make us uncomfortable. And we need to like have those moments of like serious, unhappy, like realization, right, about our life and like what where's our life going? You know. Um. Okay, went on a little bit of a rant there, but hopefully you get the idea. How about this one? No one can feel naturally homosexual. Ooh, another question or another statement. It is natural for children to keep secrets from their parents, right? Those kind of go hand in hand, and I think those are examples, in my opinion, of like poorly worded questions because the key word in both is natural, right? Um, and it's just wording them. It's okay. I'm just having trouble not seeing them as like not a descriptive statement, right? I think in actuality it's referring to them as like a choice, right? Like it's a choice to feel homosexual. It's a choice to keep secrets from your parents. But even that's like a little bit foggy for me. I think these ones could have been worded a little bit better. Um, because I think, for example, the homosexual question, even people that oppose homosexuality, a lot of them will agree that people can feel naturally, quote unquote, homosexual. But it's like, do they think that it should be legal? Like, maybe not, right? Um, and we won't get too into the children one. I think that one's like an even bigger can of worms. But yeah. Um, ooh, these religion questions were interesting. Because they're not really religion. The first one is astrology accurately predicts many things. The second one is some people are naturally unlucky, right? Those are sort of like fatalistic questions about the universe and about life, right? And my prediction is that they would push you more authoritarian on both of those if you answer yes, because both of them strongly imply like an essentialism, right? And someone who believes like in essentialist qualities probably does believe some people are naturally meant to rule. Some people are naturally meant to, for example, like be a king, right? Or be like a czar or an emperor or whatever, right? Um, so yeah, I think I don't know. Those questions are fascinating me because again, they're just like another window into the authoritarian mind and like how they think. Super super interesting. Um, we should always be thinking about like other people's perspectives and like why they view the world the way they do. You know, I think these are a great window into that, right? If you believe in essentialist qualities, you're probably more likely to be authoritarian. Probably, you know. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. Um, and yeah, that's like mostly what I had to say. The final thing that's weird about the political compass test is that for some reason it like advertises caricatures under your results. I thought that was kind of weird. Um, Kind of a wacky little like group of guys over there, but you know what? They've been churning out those tests for eighth graders for how many years now? So I guess we gotta give them some respect. Anyway, hopefully we'll talk about values again at some point. It's kind of my first video in a while, so crazy, I guess. But yeah, peace out.